35 years old, and I finally figured out what my family really thinks of me. Actually, that's a lie. I've known for years. I just decided this Christmas I was done pretending it didn't matter. Some backstory, because you need to understand how screwed up this family is. I'm the middle child of three. My older brother Dwayne is the golden boy. Married to Jennifer, 2 kids, works in finance, owns a house in the suburbs. My younger sister Patricia is daddy's little princess. Just got engaged to some guy named Sutton who apparently has family money. Then there's me. I've been the family disappointment since I was probably 12. Not because I'm actually a failure, but because I never fit their perfect little mold. I went to college but studied art instead of business. I moved out at 18 and refused their money. I've had relationships but never married the right kind of girl according to them. For the past decade, I've been working freelance design and barely scraping by. But I was happy. That was my first mistake, being happy without their approval. Every family gathering was the same routine. Dwayne would show up with Jennifer and the kids, Patricia would bring whatever boyfriend was currently funding her lifestyle, and I'd sit there while they all made little comments. "Oh, you're still doing the art thing. When are you going to get a real job? Aren't you getting a little old to be living like a college student? Maybe if you dressed better, you'd find someone to settle down with." The comments got worse over the years. Mom would introduce me to people as her son who's still figuring things out. Dad would change the subject whenever anyone asked what I did for work. Dwayne started making jokes about how I was going to be the weird uncle living in their basement someday. Patricia would literally roll her eyes when I talked. But here's what they didn't know. 3 years ago, I stopped being broke. I landed a contract with a tech startup that went absolutely insane. 6 figures, then 7 figures. I didn't tell them because I was curious how long they'd keep treating me like garbage when they thought I had nothing. Turns out the answer is forever. I've been quietly preparing for this moment. Not just financially, though that helped. I've been watching, listening, taking notes. You know how families have secrets? Mine has a lot of them. And when people think you're worthless, they get really careless about what they say around you. Like how Dwayne's been borrowing money from Dad's business account for his mortgage payments. Or how Patricia's engagement ring is actually a rental, because Sutton lost his job 6 months ago, and she's been lying about it. Or how Mom's been telling the neighbors I'm probably gay because I haven't brought a girl home in 2 years. Except she uses much nastier words when she thinks I can't hear. But the breaking point came last month. I called Mom to ask what time I should arrive for Christmas dinner. Simple question, right? She got quiet for a second, then said she needed to talk to Dad and would call me back. That should have been my first red flag. When someone needs to consult about what time you should show up to a family dinner, you're not really wanted there. She called back 2 hours later. This is where it gets good, and by good I mean absolutely infuriating. Mom told me they'd been talking as a family, meaning her, Dad, Dwayne, and Patricia, and they thought it might be better if I didn't come this year. They wanted a peaceful Christmas focused on the grandchildren and Patricia's engagement. Having me there would just create tension because everyone always has to worry about my feelings and walk on eggshells. I asked her what she meant by walking on eggshells. She said, "Well, you know how you get when people ask about your life. You get defensive and make everyone uncomfortable. Maybe it would be better if I got my life together first and then we could talk about including me in family events again." I stayed calm on the phone. I said, "Okay, I understand. Have a nice Christmas." She actually sounded relieved that I wasn't arguing. She said she was proud of me for being mature about it, and maybe this would be good motivation for me to make some positive changes in my life. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment, my very nice apartment that costs more per month than Dwayne's mortgage payment, and decided I was done with this family's version of maturity. I called Mom back the next day. I told her I'd been thinking about what she said, and she was absolutely right. I did need to make some changes. But first, I wanted to come to Christmas dinner anyway. Not to cause problems, but because I had something important to tell everyone. Something that might actually make them proud of me for once. The curiosity killed her. She asked what it was. I said it was a surprise, but it would definitely change how the family saw me. I promised I wouldn't cause any drama or make anyone uncomfortable. I just wanted one last chance to be part of the family before I made my big announcement. She talked to Dad. They decided to let me come, probably because they were hoping I was going to announce I was moving far away or joining the military or something that would get me out of their hair permanently. So yesterday I showed up at their house at exactly the time I was told to arrive. I brought gifts for everyone, just like always. Nothing expensive looking because that would have blown my cover too early. I was polite, I was cheerful. I complimented Jennifer on her outfit and asked Sutton about his job prospects. Everything was going fine until we sat down for dinner. That's when Dwayne decided to get clever. He started making jokes about how nice it was that I could take time off from my busy schedule of doing whatever it is I do all day. Patricia laughed and said something about how my gifts this year were actually wrapped nicely. Did I have my girlfriend do it? When I said I wrapped them myself, she made a face like that was somehow pathetic. But I stayed calm. I smiled and played along. I even laughed at Dwayne's jokes about my career. I was waiting for the right moment. Then Dad started talking about the family business and how grateful he was that Dwayne was there to help him manage everything. How it was such a relief to have a son he could count on to handle important things. How family businesses need family members who understand responsibility and commitment. That's when I knew it was time. I cleared my throat and said I had that announcement I'd promised them. Everyone got quiet and looked at me expectantly. Even the kids stopped playing with their food. I told them I had some news about my career that I thought would interest them, especially Dad, since he was just talking about responsibility and commitment. Then Dwayne interrupted me. He said he hoped I wasn't going to announce another one of my get-rich-quick schemes or ask Dad for money to start some art business. Everyone laughed. That's when I realized they weren't just dismissive of me. They actually enjoyed humiliating me. This wasn't passive neglect. It was active cruelty. So I changed my plan. Instead of making my announcement, I smiled and said, "You know what? You're right. I should probably wait until I have everything figured out before I bother you with my little projects." The look of satisfaction on their faces was everything I needed to see. But then Patricia couldn't leave it alone. She said maybe next year I'd have something real to share instead of just more fantasy plans. Dad nodded and said it would be nice if I could finally give them some good news about my future, instead of just disappointing them every year. I excused myself to use the bathroom. While I was gone, I could hear them talking about me in the dining room, about how sad it was that I was 35 and still living like a teenager, about how they didn't know what they'd done wrong to end up with such an irresponsible son, about how at least they had Dwayne and Patricia to be proud of. When I came back to the table, I had made a decision, but not the one they were expecting. I sat down and told them I wanted to ask them something important. I said I'd been doing a lot of thinking about what they'd said, about getting my life together and being someone they could be proud of. I wanted to know exactly what that would look like. What would I need to accomplish for them to actually want me at family dinners? They exchanged looks. Then Dad started talking about stability, marriage, a real career, contributing to society. Dwayne added that it might help if I stopped being so sensitive about feedback and learned to take constructive criticism. Patricia said maybe if I dressed better and acted more mature, people would take me more seriously. I listened to everything they said. I nodded. I asked follow-up questions. I really made them think I was taking their advice to heart. Then I asked one more question. I said if I managed to accomplish all of those things, would they welcome me back into the family? Would they treat me like an equal instead of a charity case? Mom actually got emotional. She said of course they would. They just wanted me to be happy and successful. All of this was coming from a place of love. That's when I knew I had them exactly where I wanted them. I smiled and said that was really good to know, because I had something to tell them after all. The room got quiet again, but this time I could see they were nervous, and they should be. Update 1. Holy crap. The response to my first post was insane. Thank you to everyone who said I should follow through with whatever I was planning. Some of you guessed what was coming, and you were absolutely right to tell me to document everything. So where did I leave off? Right? I was sitting at that Christmas dinner table after they'd just finished explaining exactly what kind of person I'd need to become for them to respect me. Mom was getting all emotional about how this was coming from a place of love. Dad was nodding along like he'd just delivered some profound wisdom about responsibility and family values. I looked around that table at their smug, satisfied faces and decided they'd had enough time being comfortable. I told them I appreciated all their advice about getting my life together, and I was really glad to know there was still hope for me to earn their respect. Then I said I had some good news that might speed up that process. Dwayne rolled his eyes and muttered something about, "Here we go again." Patricia was already looking bored, like she expected me to announce I'd gotten a part-time job at Target, or something equally pathetic in their minds. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. Then I turned the screen toward Dad and asked if he thought someone with this kind of financial stability might qualify as having their life together. The number on that screen was just over $2 million in my primary checking account, not including investments, not including the business accounts, just the money I keep accessible for everyday expenses. Dad's face went completely blank. He stared at the phone for probably 10 seconds without saying anything. Then he looked at me like he was trying to figure out if this was some kind of joke. Mom leaned over to look at the screen. She actually gasped out loud. Then she started stammering about how that couldn't be real, asking if I'd photoshopped the screenshot or if this was some kind of prank app. I swiped over to show them the transaction history. 3 years of deposits, some of them for amounts bigger than Dad's annual salary. Contract payments, licensing fees, royalties. All legitimate, all documented, all very real. Dwayne grabbed the phone out of my hand. He was scrolling through everything, and I could see his face getting redder by the second. Finally, he looked up and demanded to know where this money came from. He said it had to be some kind of scam or illegal activity because there was no way I could have earned this much money doing whatever it is I do. That's when I got to deliver my favorite line of the entire evening. I told him I earned it doing exactly what I've been doing for the past 3 years. The art thing that he's been making jokes about. The freelance design work that Dad changes the subject about. The career that Patricia calls my little hobby. The silence that followed was absolutely beautiful. Jennifer was the first one to speak. She asked how long I'd had this money. When I told her 3 years, she looked at Dwayne like she was trying to calculate something in her head. Patricia demanded to know why I never told them. She said it was cruel to let them worry about me when I was apparently doing fine. She actually used the word cruel, like I was the one who'd been behaving badly here. I asked her what exactly they'd been worried about. Because from where I was sitting, they seemed pretty comfortable making jokes about my failures and lecturing me about responsibility. If they were so concerned about my well-being, they had a funny way of showing it. Mom started crying. Not like sad crying, but that frustrated crying people do when they realize they've been caught doing something awful. She said they were just trying to motivate me to reach my potential. They thought I was struggling and they wanted to help. I asked her how uninviting me to Christmas dinner was supposed to help me reach my potential. How making fun of my gifts and my career and my lifestyle was motivating. How calling me immature and irresponsible was meant to be supportive. That's when Dad tried to take control of the situation. He said I was being unfair and taking things out of context. Obviously, they were proud of my success, but money wasn't everything. There were other measures of maturity and responsibility that didn't involve bank account balances. So I asked him what those measures were, because 15 minutes earlier, he'd been lecturing me about stability and contribution to society. I wanted to know what else I needed to prove to earn their respect. Dwayne jumped in and said this whole thing proved his point about me being immature. A mature person would have shared their success with family instead of hiding it and playing victim. He said I'd obviously been planning this confrontation, which showed I was manipulative and dishonest. I started laughing. I couldn't help it. Here I was showing them that everything they'd believed about me was wrong, and somehow I was still the problem. I told Dwayne he was absolutely right about one thing. I had been planning this. For 3 years, I'd been waiting to see how long they'd keep treating me like garbage when they thought I had nothing to offer. Turns out the answer was as long as I let them. Patricia asked what that was supposed to mean. She said I was acting like they'd been horrible to me. But families tease each other and give advice. That's what loving families do. That's when I decided to share some of the other things I'd been keeping track of. I told Patricia that loving families probably don't spend holidays making fun of each other's financial struggles, especially when the person being mocked is actually more financially stable than anyone else at the table. Speaking of financial struggles, I asked how Sutton's job search was going, since he'd been unemployed for 6 months now. Patricia's face went white. Sutton started stuttering something about how he was between opportunities and exploring options. I said that was interesting because last week I'd overheard Patricia on the phone telling someone that the engagement ring was a rental, and they were living off her credit cards. The explosion that followed was everything I'd hoped for. Patricia started screaming at me for eavesdropping and violating her privacy. Sutton was demanding to know how I could have possibly heard a private phone conversation. Mom was asking what rental ring meant. Dad was yelling at everyone to calm down. I stayed completely calm. I explained that when you talk on the phone in the kitchen while I'm in the living room, it's not eavesdropping. It's just having ears. I said I wasn't trying to violate anyone's privacy. I just happened to be there when she decided to have a very loud conversation about her financial problems. Then I turned to Dwayne. I told him I was curious about his perspective on family members who weren't completely honest about their financial situations. Since he just called me manipulative and dishonest for not sharing my success, I wondered how he felt about people who borrowed money without fully disclosing their circumstances. Dwayne asked what I was talking about. I said I was talking about the fact that he'd been taking money from Dad's business account for 8 months to cover his mortgage payments. I asked if that qualified as the kind of responsibility and contribution to society that Dad had been talking about earlier. This time, Dad was the one who went white. He asked Dwayne if that was true. Dwayne started explaining that it was just temporary help, and he was paying it back, and Dad had said it was okay. Dad said he'd agreed to one loan, not ongoing withdrawals. Jennifer looked like she wanted to disappear. She kept saying they were going to pay it back and it wasn't stealing because it was family money. I told them I wasn't judging anyone's financial decisions. I was just trying to understand the family values that I was supposed to be living up to. Because apparently, hiding success makes me manipulative, but hiding failure is just family helping family. Mom tried to redirect the conversation. She said we were all getting too emotional and maybe we should focus on the positive news about my career. She said they were happy for me and proud of me, and maybe we could start fresh now that everything was out in the open. I asked her if that meant I was invited to future family dinners, if they were going to stop making jokes about my lifestyle and my career, if I could expect the same level of respect they showed each other. She said, of course, absolutely. They just needed some time to adjust to this new information. That's when I told them I didn't think they understood the situation correctly. I said I wasn't asking for their approval anymore. I was telling them how things were going to work from now on. And the first thing that was going to change was that I was done pretending their behavior toward me was acceptable. Dad asked what I meant by that. I told him I meant that for 3 years I'd been successful enough to help this family financially, if I'd wanted to. I could have paid off Dwayne's mortgage, covered Patricia's wedding expenses, helped with the grandchildren's college funds. Instead, I'd watched them struggle while they mocked my supposed failures. I said from now on, they could enjoy the same level of support from me that they'd shown me, which was exactly none. Dwayne started arguing that I was being petty and vindictive. He said if I really cared about family, I'd want to help instead of punishing them for past mistakes. I asked him if he'd been caring about family when he called me a future basement dweller, if Patricia had been caring about family when she rolled her eyes every time I spoke, if Mom and Dad had been caring about family when they uninvited me to Christmas. The room got quiet again, but this time it felt different, more tense. Then Dwayne said something that made me realize just how deep their resentment went. He said maybe the reason they'd been critical was because I'd always acted like I was better than them, like their conventional choices were beneath me, like I was too artistic and creative to care about normal family values. I stared at him. I asked when I had ever acted like I was better than anyone, when I had ever criticized their choices or made them feel bad about their lives. He said it was in my attitude, the way I never asked for help or advice, the way I stayed distant from family events and didn't participate in conversations about careers and relationships. He said it felt like I was judging them for being mainstream. This was the moment when I finally understood what had really been happening all these years. They hadn't been trying to motivate me or help me. They'd been trying to knock me down because my independence made them feel insecure. I told Dwayne that not asking for help wasn't the same as thinking I was better than anyone. I said maybe the reason I stayed distant was because every family conversation seemed to involve explaining why my choices were wrong and their choices were right. Patricia jumped in and said that wasn't true. She said they'd always been supportive. They just wanted me to be happy and settled like they were. I asked her to give me one example of them being supportive of any decision I'd made in the past 10 years. One time, they'd said something positive about my career, my lifestyle, or my choices, without adding advice about how I could do better. She couldn't answer. None of them could. That's when I stood up from the table. I told them I was going to leave before this got any uglier, but I wanted them to think about something. For 3 years, I'd had the power to change everyone's financial situation in this room. Instead, I'd use that time to watch and learn exactly what kind of people they were when they thought I couldn't affect their lives. I said what I'd learned was that they were bullies who felt better about themselves by putting down anyone who didn't fit their narrow definition of success. And now that they knew I didn't need their approval or their help, they were going to find out what it felt like to be on the other side of that dynamic. Dwayne asked what that was supposed to mean. I told him he'd find out soon enough. As I was walking to the door, Mom called after me. She said I was ruining Christmas and breaking up the family over misunderstandings and hurt feelings. She begged me to come back and talk this through like adults. I turned around one last time. I told her that adults don't uninvite family members to holidays because they're embarrassed by them. Adults don't spend years mocking someone's career while borrowing money from their parents. Adults don't gang up on the person who actually has their life together while lecturing them about responsibility. Then I left. But here's the thing. Reddit. I wasn't done. That was just the opening move. Stay tuned for part 3, because the real fun is just getting started. Update 2. Reddit. You guys have been absolutely amazing with your support and advice. Some of you predicted exactly what would happen next, and you were right on the money. But I promise you, even the most creative commenters didn't see this level of chaos coming. So I left them sitting at that Christmas dinner table with their world completely flipped upside down. I went home, poured myself a very expensive glass of whiskey, and waited. Because I knew they weren't going to just let this go. 3 years of treating me like garbage doesn't disappear overnight. Even when you find out the person you've been mocking has more money than your entire extended family combined. I didn't have to wait long. First text came from Mom at 11 p.m. that same night. She said they were all very hurt and confused by what happened at dinner. She said they needed to talk about this as a family because there had obviously been some terrible misunderstandings. She wanted me to come over the next day so we could work this out like mature adults. I texted back that I thought we'd already established I was the only mature adult in this family. Then came the flood. Dad texted saying I was being unreasonable and stubborn. Patricia sent me 3 paragraphs about how families are supposed to support each other through difficulties, not use private information as weapons. Dwayne actually called me at 1 a.m., demanding to know where I got off threatening the family and acting like some kind of victim when I'd been lying to everyone for years. The phone call with Dwayne was especially satisfying. He was furious. He kept saying I had deliberately deceived them and made them look foolish. He said if I really had money, I should have helped the family instead of playing games and setting traps. I asked him why he thought he was entitled to my money. He said because that's what families do, they help each other. I reminded him that when he thought I was broke, his version of family help was making jokes about me living in his basement someday. He said that was different, that was just joking around, and I was taking everything too seriously. He said the whole family was upset because they'd been trying to motivate me to succeed, and now it turned out they were wasting their time worrying about me. I told him they weren't worrying about me, they were enjoying feeling superior to me. And now that they couldn't do that anymore, they were angry because their favorite punching bag had turned out to be more successful than all of them. Dwayne said I was being paranoid and vindictive. He said normal people would be happy to share good news with their family instead of hiding it for years just to prove some twisted point. That's when I told him about the second part of my plan. See Reddit? While they were all texting and calling me that night, I was busy making some phone calls of my own. Remember how I mentioned Dad has a business? It's a small manufacturing company that's been struggling for years. They make specialized parts for construction equipment. And Dad's been talking about retirement because he can't find anyone to take over who understands the industry. Dwayne has been helping with the books and doing some of the management, but he doesn't actually know the technical side. Patricia obviously has no interest in manufacturing. And they'd all made it very clear over the years that my career was too unstable and creative to be trusted with anything important. Well, it turns out that when you have 7 figures in liquid assets and a proven track record of business success, banks and investors take your phone calls even during the holidays. I told Dwayne I'd spent the evening researching Dad's business. I said I'd looked at the financial records, which are public for the type of corporation Dad runs, and I'd identified about 15 different ways to improve efficiency, reduce costs, and expand market share. I said I'd also identified 3 of their biggest competitors who were struggling with supply chain issues that Dad's company could solve with the right backing. Dwayne asked what I was getting at. I told him I was getting at the fact that Dad's business was sitting on a gold mine of opportunities, but it needed capital investment and strategic planning to take advantage of them. The kind of investment and planning that someone with my resources and business background could provide. He got very quiet. Then he asked if I was planning to buy Dad out or something. I said no, I was planning to start my own competing business. I'd already reached out to 2 of Dad's key clients about switching suppliers. I'd contacted his main parts distributor about exclusive contracts. I'd even started talking to some of his employees about better salary packages and working conditions. The silence on the phone was perfect. Then, Dwayne started yelling. He said I couldn't do that to Dad, that it would destroy the business he'd spent 30 years building. He said I was being cruel and vindictive, and this wasn't about family anymore, this was about deliberately hurting people. I asked him how this was any different from what they'd been doing to me for years. I said when they thought I was a failure, they enjoyed making me feel small and worthless. Now that they knew I was successful, they wanted to benefit from that success without acknowledging how they'd treated me. I told him I was giving them a choice. They could genuinely apologize for years of disrespect and commit to treating me as an equal family member, or they could find out what it felt like to be on the receiving end of someone using their power against them. Dwayne said I was being insane and unreasonable. He said they'd all apologize if that's what I wanted, but threatening Dad's livelihood was going too far. I said their apologies at Christmas dinner had already proven they didn't understand what they'd done wrong. They thought this was about hurt feelings and misunderstandings, not about years of deliberate cruelty designed to make themselves feel superior. I told him that they had 48 hours to prove they understood the difference. The next morning, I got a visit from Mom and Dad together. They showed up at my apartment, which by the way is a penthouse downtown that probably costs more than their house. Seeing their faces when they walked into my place was almost worth 3 years of keeping secrets. Mom kept looking around at the artwork and furniture like she couldn't process that I actually lived there. Dad was trying to act businesslike, but I could see him calculating how much everything cost. They sat down in my living room and Dad started talking about family and forgiveness and moving past old wounds. He said he understood I was hurt by some of the things they'd said over the years, but threatening his business was crossing a line from family dispute into something more serious. I asked him if he thought making fun of my career for 3 years while I was actually more successful than him was crossing a line. He said that wasn't the same thing because they never intended to hurt me. They thought they were encouraging me to do better. I pulled out my laptop and showed them the business plan I'd been working on since the night before. 3 pages of analysis showing exactly how I could undercut his prices, steal his clients, and dominate his market share within 6 months. Mom started crying again. She said I was being cruel and this wasn't the person she raised me to be. She said families don't destroy each other over pride and ego. I told her she was right. The person she raised me to be would have just taken their abuse forever and been grateful for whatever scraps of approval they threw my way. But the person I actually became was someone who didn't tolerate disrespect from anyone, including family. Dad tried a different approach. He said he understood I was successful and he was proud of me for that. He said maybe they hadn't expressed their support well in the past, but they were a family and they needed to work together instead of against each other. I asked him what working together looked like to him. He said, well, maybe I could invest in his business instead of competing with it. We could be partners and I could help him expand and modernize. I started laughing. I told him that 48 hours ago he was lecturing me about responsibility and contribution to society. Now he wanted me to invest my money in his failing business and help him compete in a market I could dominate on my own. Mom said I was being unfair and taking his offer in the worst possible way. She said he was trying to include me in the family business and give me a real role in something important. I told her that when they thought I was broke, I wasn't responsible enough to be included in business discussions. When they found out I was wealthy, suddenly I was qualified to be a partner. I asked her what had changed about my qualifications in the past 24 hours besides their knowledge of my bank account. She couldn't answer that. Dad tried to get more specific about the partnership idea. He said I could buy in as a minority partner and help with strategic planning and capital improvements. He said it would be a good investment for me and a way to secure the family's financial future. I asked him why I would want a minority stake in his business when I could own 100% of a better business. I said his company was valuable because of the client relationships and the specialized knowledge, but I'd already figured out how to get both of those things without him. That's when Dad got angry. He said I was being vindictive and petty, trying to punish the whole family because my feelings got hurt. He said this wasn't about justice or respect. This was about me wanting to prove I was better than everyone else. I told him he was right about one thing. I did want to prove I was better than them, because for 3 years they'd been telling me I wasn't good enough to be part of this family. Now I was going to show them what not being good enough actually looked like. The conversation went in circles for another hour. They kept trying to find some middle ground where they could acknowledge they'd made mistakes without actually facing consequences for those mistakes. They wanted to apologize just enough to get me to back down without admitting that their behavior had been deliberately cruel. Finally, I told them their 48 hours was now down to about 30 hours, and they needed to leave so I could get back to work on my business plan. As they were walking to the door, Mom turned around and asked me what it would take to fix this. She said she'd do anything to bring the family back together. I told her I'd already explained what it would take, a genuine acknowledgement of how they'd treated me. Not just that my feelings got hurt, but that they had deliberately tried to make me feel worthless for their own entertainment, and a commitment to treating me with respect going forward, not just when they needed something from me. She said she could do that. She said she understood now that they'd been wrong and hurtful, and she was truly sorry. I asked her if she was apologizing because she felt bad about hurting me, or because she was scared I was going to destroy Dad's business. She couldn't answer that either. After they left, I got back to work on my business plan. Because here's the thing. Reddit, I wasn't bluffing about any of this. I really was prepared to start a competing business and drive them into the ground. I'd spent 3 years watching and learning, and I knew exactly where their weaknesses were. But I also knew they weren't going to give me a real apology. They were going to try to manipulate and guilt-trip me into backing down while giving me just enough fake remorse to think they'd changed. I was right. At hour 47 of their deadline, I got a group text from all 4 of them with a carefully worded apology that hit all the right notes while taking responsibility for exactly nothing. So I sent them my response. And Reddit, that's where this story gets really interesting. Part 4 coming soon, because you're not going to believe what happened when I actually followed through on my threats. Final update. Reddit. You beautiful monsters have been with me through this entire journey, and I promised you the final update. Buckle up, because this one is going to be satisfying. When I left you last time, I just received their pathetic group text apology that took responsibility for absolutely nothing while trying to guilt me into backing down from my business threats. The message was something like, "We're sorry if our comments came across wrong and hurt your feelings. We love you and want our family to be whole again. Please reconsider your business plans so we can move forward together." If our comments came across wrong, if they hurt my feelings. Not "we were wrong" or "we deliberately treated you terribly." Just sorry if you're too sensitive to handle family teasing. I screenshotted that text and saved it because I knew it would be important later. My response was simple. Thanks for proving you still don't understand what you did wrong. Business launches. Monday. And Reddit, I wasn't bluffing. That weekend I worked around the clock finalizing everything I'd been planning. Filed the LLC paperwork, secured the initial funding, finalized contracts with 2 equipment suppliers who were thrilled to have a customer with actual capital. Most importantly, I had meetings with 3 of Dad's biggest clients. Here's something I learned during my 3 years of watching and listening. Dad's clients weren't actually that loyal to him personally. They were loyal to reliable service and competitive pricing. And Dad's biggest weakness was that he'd been running his business the same way for 20 years without adapting to new technology or market demands. The first client I met with was this manufacturing company that accounts for about 30% of Dad's annual revenue. I walked into their office Monday morning with a presentation showing how I could provide the same products at 15% lower cost with guaranteed faster delivery times. The owner asked how I could beat Dad's prices, and I explained that I was using more efficient production methods and had better supplier relationships. He asked if I knew Dad personally, since we had the same last name. I told him Dad was my father, and that I'd been studying his business model for years specifically to improve on it. I said this wasn't personal, it was just business, and I was confident I could provide better value to his company. They signed a preliminary agreement that afternoon. The second client meeting went even better. This company had been complaining to Dad for months about delivery delays and quality control issues. I showed them my production timeline and quality assurance protocols. I also mentioned that I was hiring some of Dad's most experienced technicians who were frustrated with the management style at his company. That was true, by the way. I'd approached 4 of Dad's key employees over the weekend with offers of significantly higher salaries and better working conditions. 3 of them accepted immediately. They'd been underpaid and overworked for years, and Dad had been too stubborn to listen to their suggestions for improving efficiency. By Tuesday afternoon, I had signed agreements with clients representing about 60% of Dad's business, and half his technical staff had given notice. That's when the real panic started. Dwayne called me Tuesday evening, absolutely screaming. He said I was destroying the family business out of spite, and that Dad was talking about having to declare bankruptcy within 6 months if this continued. He said Mom was crying every day, and Dad wasn't sleeping because he was trying to figure out how to save 30 years of work. I asked Dwayne if Dad had considered adapting his business model instead of expecting customers to stay loyal out of sentimentality. I said maybe if he'd invested in modernization and employee satisfaction instead of taking his success for granted, he wouldn't be losing clients to a startup. Dwayne said I was being cruel and vindictive, that this was way beyond anything they'd done to deserve it. He said making fun of someone's career wasn't the same as destroying their livelihood. That's when I reminded him of something he'd said at Christmas dinner. He'd joked about me being the weird uncle living in their basement someday. I told him that joke was about destroying my potential livelihood, my confidence, my relationships, my sense of self-worth. I said for 3 years they'd been systematically trying to make me feel like a failure who didn't deserve respect or inclusion. I asked him how that was different from what I was doing to Dad's business, except that I was using superior strategy and resources instead of just mockery and exclusion. Dwayne said it wasn't the same thing because they were family, and families are supposed to forgive each other and work together. He said I was taking business advice and constructive criticism too personally. I told him that business advice would have been offering to help me improve my career or connecting me with opportunities. What they'd done was mock my success while keeping me excluded from family discussions about anything important. They'd treated me like a charity case while borrowing money from Dad and lying about their own financial situations. We argued for almost an hour. Dwayne kept trying to find some angle that would make me back down, appealing to family loyalty, promising things would be different, offering to make me a partner in Dad's business on better terms. He even suggested that maybe my success had gone to my head and I was becoming the kind of person who uses money to hurt people. I asked him if Dad's money had gone to his head when he was lecturing me about responsibility while secretly borrowing from the business account. I asked if Patricia's family connections had gone to her head when she was mocking my gifts while lying about her engagement ring. Finally, Dwayne played what he thought was his trump card. He said that if I continued with this business plan, I would be proving that I was exactly the kind of selfish, vindictive person they'd been worried I was becoming. He said destroying Dad's business wouldn't prove I was successful. It would prove I was just another rich person who uses money to bully people who can't fight back. I told him that was really interesting perspective from someone who'd spent years bullying someone he thought couldn't fight back. Then I said something that I'd been thinking about since Christmas dinner. I told Dwayne that the reason they'd treated me badly wasn't because they thought I was failing. It was because they were afraid I might succeed. My independence and refusal to follow their conventional path made them feel insecure about their own choices, so they'd spent years trying to tear me down to make themselves feel better. Dwayne denied that completely. He said they'd always wanted me to succeed. They just wanted me to succeed in ways that made sense to them. He said my lifestyle and career choices seemed risky and unstable, and they were trying to protect me from disappointment. I asked him why they'd never once asked me how my business was going or shown interest in my projects, why they'd never offered connections or advice or support. I said if they wanted me to succeed, they had a funny way of showing it. He couldn't answer that. On Wednesday, I got a visit from Mom and Patricia together. They came to my office. Yes, I'd rented office space and hired staff, because when you're destroying your family's business, you might as well do it properly. Seeing them walk into my professional space was almost as satisfying as the Christmas dinner revelation. Mom kept looking around at the employees and equipment like she couldn't process that I'd built this in 4 days. Patricia was more direct. She asked me what it would take to stop this vendetta and go back to being a family. She said everyone was willing to admit they'd made mistakes and treat me with more respect going forward. I told her I appreciated the offer, but I was curious about something. I asked if she would have been willing to admit mistakes and show respect if I were still broke and unsuccessful. She said that wasn't a fair question because the situation was different now. I said that was exactly my point. Their respect was conditional on my ability to hurt them. When they thought I was powerless, they felt free to treat me however they wanted. Mom started crying and said I was tearing the family apart over pride and old grudges. She said Dad was talking about selling the house to cover business debts, and Dwayne might have to find a new job if the company went under. I asked her if she remembered uninviting me to Christmas dinner because my presence would make people uncomfortable. I said apparently family unity was only important when they needed something from me. Patricia tried a different approach. She said she understood I was angry and wanted them to face consequences, but destroying Dad's business would hurt the grandchildren too. She said Mom and Dad helped with daycare costs and would have to stop if they lost their income. I told Patricia that was really touching concern for the grandchildren from someone who'd been lying about her engagement and living off credit cards for months. I asked if she'd thought about how her financial deception might affect the family before she decided to mock my supposedly cheap gifts. That's when Patricia got angry. She said I was nitpicking every little comment and family dynamic to justify being vindictive. She said normal people don't hold grudges for years and plan elaborate revenge schemes over teasing and family drama. I asked her if she thought 3 years of systematic mockery qualified as teasing. I said when someone consistently excludes you from family events, makes jokes about your failures, and treats your career like a hobby, that's not teasing. That's bullying. She said I was being overdramatic and acting like a victim. She said lots of families give each other grief and people don't usually react by trying to destroy each other financially. That's when I pulled out my phone and showed them both the screenshots I'd been taking for 3 years. Comments at family gatherings, text messages from group chats, social media posts where they'd made jokes about my lifestyle. I had documentation of dozens of incidents where they'd mocked my career, my financial situation, my relationships, and my life choices. I also showed them the Christmas dinner text where Mom had uninvited me, and their recent apology text that took responsibility for nothing. Mom looked at the screenshots and started crying harder. She said she didn't realize it had been so frequent or that it had hurt me so much. She said she thought it was just normal family dynamics, and I understood it was coming from a place of concern. I told her that concern would have involved asking how they could help or support me. What they'd done was systematically tear down my confidence and exclude me from family events because they enjoyed feeling superior to someone. Patricia asked what I wanted from them. She said if I needed them to apologize publicly or admit they were wrong, they would do that. She said if I needed them to commit to treating me differently, they could agree to that too. I told them what I'd told Dad and Dwayne. I wasn't interested in apologies motivated by fear. If they were genuinely sorry for how they'd treated me, that was nice, but it didn't change the fact that they'd shown me exactly who they were when they thought I couldn't fight back. I said I was done being part of a family that only showed respect when it was strategically necessary. Mom asked if that meant I was cutting them off permanently. I told her it meant I was creating boundaries that protected me from people who'd proven they couldn't be trusted to treat me well consistently. Patricia said I was being unfair and punishing them for mistakes instead of giving them a chance to change. I said they'd had 3 years to change their behavior and had only attempted to do so when they discovered I had the power to hurt them back. The conversation ended with them begging me to reconsider and me telling them my business decisions weren't up for family discussion anymore. By Friday, my new company had secured contracts worth about 75% of Dad's annual revenue. His business didn't collapse immediately, but it downsized significantly. He had to lay off most of his remaining staff and sell some equipment to cover debts. I heard through former employees that Dad spent most of that week walking around the shop muttering about how he couldn't understand how I'd learned so much about his business so quickly. Apparently, it never occurred to him that I'd been paying attention during 3 years of family gatherings where business was discussed like I wasn't in the room. The best part? My new business was actually more successful than I'd planned. Turns out there was a lot of demand for modernized manufacturing with better customer service and employee treatment. Within 6 months, I'd expanded beyond just competing with Dad to serving clients throughout the region. As for the family relationships, Mom and Patricia still text me occasionally with updates about family events and attempts to rebuild connections. Dad and Dwayne have mostly stopped trying to contact me directly, though I hear they still complain about my business success to other relatives. I haven't been to another family gathering and I probably won't be. Not because I'm holding grudges, but because I've learned I'm happier surrounding myself with people who respect me consistently instead of people who only respect me when it's convenient. The funniest part is that other relatives have started reaching out to congratulate me on my business success and ask for career advice. Apparently, the same family members who used to nod along when Mom and Dad complained about my lifestyle are now very interested in learning from my expertise. I've been polite but distant with most of them, because here's what 3 years of planning taught me. People reveal their true character when they think you can't affect their lives. And I'm done pretending that family relationships are exempt from basic standards of respect and decency. Some of you might think I went too far, or that I should forgive them and rebuild the relationships. But here's the thing. Forgiveness doesn't require putting yourself back in position to be hurt by the same people who've already proven they enjoy hurting you when they think they can get away with it. I'm not angry anymore. I'm actually grateful this happened because it taught me exactly what kind of family I was dealing with and motivated me to build a life where I don't need their approval or inclusion to be successful and happy. And to the Reddit users who said I should document everything and follow through on my threats, you were absolutely right. Sometimes the only way to deal with bullies is to show them what happens when their victim has more power than they do. Thanks for following this journey with me. It's been wild, but I regret nothing.